Some time ago, an American coach living in New Zealand and fearful of becoming a yesterday's man made the comment that at the last Olympics, New Zealand won all its medals sitting down, including one for boxing. For that, he had to take a punch in a pub, but he did gain publicity. I am sure that coach was unaware that one of the US's greatest upset victories was won sitting down in the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. This is probably because of the great Jesse Owens' 4 gold medals and 3 world records in athletics. There is a story that Adolf Hitler would not shake Jesse's hand, but this is untrue. Hitler was not in the stadium at that time. There had been controversies even before the games had begun. The English team marched past Hitler, giving the Olympic salute, arm extended, straight out at shoulder height, palm down. But the crowd interpreted it as the Nazi salute and went wild. The Olympic salute was never used again. New Zealand's flag bearer, Jack Lovelock, who would later win gold in the middle distance track, was instructed by their military minder to lower the flag when he saw a short man in military uniform wearing moustache. He did so, but the man was not Hitler. Afterwards, New Zealand was lauded by other countries for not lowering their flag for a dictator. The US team marched past, flag held aloft. The stars and stripes are never lowered. The US rowers that ended up in Berlin were not only from the wrong side of the tracks, but on the wrong side of their country. America's powerhouse of rowing were in the eastern states at Harvard, Yale, and other prestige universities that had the money to hire the best coaches available and provide the best equipment, including handmade shells. On the West Coast, the teams from Washington and California State had only themselves to compete against with very limited funds. Their rowers were students with part-time jobs to pay for their university fees, and Washington State had the additional problems of bad weather patterns, chopping and changing water conditions, and similar wind patterns. Their workboat resembled a Roman galley, and only the A team were permitted to use the one locally made racing shell. In the run-up years, the two universities traded wins and losses until Washington State emerged the winner. But there was a catch. They had to travel to Boston, third class, by train, nursing their precious shell in the luggage carriage. It took 3 weeks. They beat the Eastern crews with a tenacity lacking in the local teams. They were going to the Olympics. Well, not quite. They would have to pay their own way to Berlin. And if they were unable to do this, Harvard would be happy to take their place. Infuriated, the reporters from Seattle who were covering the event bombarded the public and business to fundraise, and it worked. They were on their way, but not first class. None of them had ever been outside of the US. When they arrived, they were well looked after, but ignored. This suited their strategy. They trained to become part of the shell, one identity. Making the final turned the spotlight on them, but their manager skillfully shielded them from all but the mandatory interviews. All eyes were on the favourites, Germany. The US team was sophomores and juniors up against state-funded athletes. And because they were outsiders, they were given the outside lane 6 that was exposed to wind that added 2 boat lengths behind the boat in lane 1. The crew, desperately trying to balance their shell, missed the drop of the starter's flag and started half a stroke late. With the 75,000 crowd shouting "Deutschland, Deutschland" to Hitler and Goebbels standing on the bridge overlooking the course. The US came out of the bend in third, behind Italy and Germany, and began to close the gap. There is a time when, with every muscle, tendon and sinuses striving in unison for perfect timing, the shell rises in the water and becomes a flying boat. The Cox pleaded for a miracle, and he got it. No one knew when they crossed the line who had won until a reef was placed in the US shell. They had won by 0.6 of a second. They looked up at the packed bridge. Hitler and Goebbels had vanished. Italy got the silver, and Germany had to settle for bronze. All across the US, those listening on the radio went wild. Fittingly, the crew that had left in the dark arrived home in the light as heroes. There will never be a repeat performance. After the Helsinki Olympics in 1952, communist countries began recruiting promising young athletes into the army, allowing them to train full-time and subjecting them to new performance-enhancing drugs. Some female athletes had 5 o'clock shadows until sex testings saw them disappear. Western countries allowed their athletes trust funds to allow full-time training. International drug testing has gone some way to remedy the problem, but still one has to wonder who has got the best coach or the best chemist.